Were you always attracted to motorsports growing up?
My parents told me at dinner one night, she goes, for your birthday, we're going to go to the Indy 500. It's a moment you're never going to forget. My way to be around racing was through photography.
When did you sneak into your first race?
March 28th, 1971 is the beginning of my career. I went down the journey. I wanted to be an art director, illustrator, maybe a magazine editor, but I really wanted to race is the primary reason I did all of this.
When it comes time to put something onto film, I want it to have some element of participation.
Mr. Jeff Zwart, thanks for coming to the Creative Drive.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Always a fan of this little podcast here and everything. I'm good to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I invited Paul Pfanner here as well.
Who's that?
You guys are co-founders of Racer. I mean, I don't think a lot of people know that, though. I mean, can you just start by how you guys met and what was it like back in the day?
My attraction in general was to motorsport. And, when you looked at the people that were defining motorsport at the time, it existed in, competition press, Auto Week, kind of things like that. And so naturally, I was just interested in the visual side of motorsport. And, there was a publishing group that made posters, and it was Paul Oxman Publishing, and my walls growing up were literally covered in photographs from Paul Oxman and different things along the way, so anything that was visual and feeling kind of progressive that could give me a window into motorsport was something that was interesting, and so through Paul Oxman and association with Paul here, it just was kind of almost a natural thing. And then Paul was really emerging into the motorsport scene in so many ways that were really interesting to me. And, also as a photographer, you're looking for access. So, I wanted to have access to motorsport, and Paul Oxman was really the first person to publish one of my photographs. And from there, it was my access to get to go to races. And I think the biggest projects in the beginning were doing the runoffs for sports car, and kind of going to this place where there was 40 classes or 30 classes of 40 cars deep. I mean, I can still say in my life at this point, probably the best racing I've seen in my life were the Formula Ford races at the runoffs. It was just it was just spectacular. And as a photographer, it gave you such opportunity. And you'd go to a place like Road Atlanta, and it'd be your challenge to make Road Atlanta look good and shoot each race so it looks not just like the other race. Mm-hmm. And it was just nonstop, maybe 5 days of immersion of the top amateur racers in the U.S. And so that accessibility really gave me that outlet to photograph, and Paul was key to all of that, and we developed a friendship out of that, and ultimately we find ourselves here.
Hey, do you really think that cafe Wi-Fi is safe? Well, think again. Public Wi-Fi can be a hacker's playground. With the man-in-the-middle attack, cyber criminals set up fake networks like cafe-free Wi-Fi, intercept everything you do online. They can do that. They can steal passwords, spy on your emails, and intercept the data you send and receive. The fix is something like NordVPN. Encrypt your internet traffic so hackers get nothing. Not your logins, not your banking info. Your emails are safe, and not even those Fast and the Furious memes. So right now you can grab an exclusive NordVPN deal plus 4 extra months for free. Just head to nordvpn.com/racer and stay protected. It's risk-free, and you get a 30-day money-back guarantee. So stay safe, keep those hackers away, and sign up now. Back to the show. How old were you guys when you first met, Paul?
I think I was a year older. but at least 5 years less mature. And Jeff was still in college. You were
I was in college, so
21.
I was still at Art Center. I mean, I wasn't. It wasn't like I graduated and was looking for a job. I was in school.
I was in school, yeah. So we met, and I'd been working in the space since I was 17. So I'd had a few years and a couple of magazine involvements by that point.
And your first drive together was in Jeff's 914, right?
Yeah, which I love that car, by the way. It's one of my favorite cars.
And I still have it.
We had an outreach from an acquaintance named Tom Spaulding, and Tom had purchased a really interesting Can-Am car back when Can-Am cars had transitioned from being two-seater monsters to converted Formula 5000 cars with a center seat. And this car had an semi-enclosed cockpit. It looked like a sports racing car, and he offered me the opportunity to drive it. I was the art director for Sports Car Magazine. It was as we had just taken the magazine on as a contract, and Jeff, we'd gotten to know each other a little bit, and obviously we'd done one shoot, and then this was the big shoot we were going to go do. We had to go up to Paso Robles, I believe.
Yeah, San Luis Obispo area. Yeah.
That's somewhere up in that area where his race shop was, to go look at the car and measure it. On the way up, we had this discussion, and I'd worked on a magazine called Formula, and I thought it was awesome. But then Jeff is sitting, he maybe has slightly higher standards than I do, because he wasn't impressed with it. And he said, someday, I'd like there to be a magazine like that in America that was like a European or the magazines we see in Japan. And we started this discussion that lasted a better part of an hour and a half of the trip, just talking about things we'd like to do. But the magazine was one of them. And that idea, that was early 1978. It took us until 1992 to actually launch the magazine. But the commitment that you had to working with us and bringing your great work. The work was stupendous. You did rig shots for that first Can-Am shoot, where we built these really incredible rigs that held the camera away from this, very fast race car. And the photography was stunning and unusual. But at the heart of it was, we knew there was a hole in the market for something like Racer, and our commitment to doing it was steadfast. We found a way.
And I think, the other side of it is, like I said, too, is that, between Auto Week, On Track, everything, they were predominantly black and white photography magazines, when they ran things. And, I'm a photographer, so I naturally want people to experience what I was looking at on the light table with a slide of Kodachrome or something. And there wasn't anything that was really dedicated to the art side. And it's in the same way, growing up, there was Car and Driver, there was Road and Track, there was Motor Trend. Motor Trend was more domestic car based. Road and Track, Car and Driver were kind of split, but Road and Track really celebrated the artists. If it was a painter or a sculptor or a photographer, that was photography. So as I turned pages of Road and Track, that became my favorite magazine, because of that. And I felt like, well, there's the example in road-going cars and production cars and things like that. Where's the example in motorsport of something like that? So that was kind of our dream at the time, to try to do something like that.
Yeah. Where were your earliest inspirations?
I think, if we kind of put this down to motorsport in a way, I think that Jesse Alexander's book At Speed, for a number of reasons. Number one, it gave you, as an American, or as an American kid, let's say, a glimpse into F1, because we just weren't exposed that much to it. The other side of it was the tactile experience. When you opened that book, I think it was about 3.5 feet wide when you opened it up, because it was,
we have it in the office.
Yeah, it was a very large scale book, and it just, to turn those pages and look at the grain of the film and see the imagery and Francois Sever and the eyes and the intimate nature of what Jesse found fascinating to photograph. That was truly an inspiration. Plus, Jesse also had the connection with Road and Track magazine, so that kind of all put it together. But that was really, as I've said before, it wasn't photography that I really loved. It was my way to be around racing was through photography. Mm-hmm. And that made the challenge of high performance photography, high action photography, all those kind of things, one of your skill sets. It had to be shooting action. Right. And so therefore, I learned how to shoot action, mm-hmm. and that made me somewhat unique in the advertising world, that most everybody was shooting static cars in the advertising world. So naturally, when I started to kind of get noticed within the pages of Road and Track and On Track and different magazines early in my career, I was really naturally sought after for the action side of things. But it was motorsport that I crafted that.
Hey, thanks for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, whichever platform you're on, and leave some comments. We actually read every one of them, and it's actually great for the algo. All right, back to the show. Were you always attracted to motorsports growing up?
Yeah, I mean, my motorsport story, I really owe to my dad. And, there was a moment there were two moments in my life that really kind of brought me to that early on. Certainly, and then also with the reoccurring theme that is no secret with Porsche. Mm-hmm. My father bought his first and only new Porsche in 1964. We lived in Wilmington, Delaware. My father was a plastics engineer, obviously with DuPont and everything in Delaware. Plastics was a big deal, and so we'd traveled across the U.S. to a new home and Dad to a new job, and he finally bought his first new really Porsche. He'd always had Volkswagen Beetles, and came home early May with a slate gray and red leather interior 356C, and I just thought that was the coolest thing possible in the driveway. And 2 weeks later, basically, was my birthday, and my parents told me at dinner one night, she goes, for your birthday, we thought we'd go somewhere for your birthday, okay, and we're going to go to the Indy 500. So as a kid, 9 years old, getting in the back of a 356, no seat belts, sitting there peering between the seats, watching my dad shift gears, hands on the steering wheel, make the journey from Wilmington, Delaware to Indianapolis, stay in a little motel, and get up in the morning and drive out to a racetrack with an endless area of parking. Park this little 356 there and there, go into turn 3, go up the grandstands, come out near the top of the grandstands and look over, 450,000 people or 350,000 people, and see that. And then maybe an hour later, see 33 cars coming down the back straightaway into turn 3, and I'm in that grandstand. Okay, I've driven there in a Porsche. I'm in the top of the grandstands. There's A.J. Foyt, there's Pernelli Jones, there's the legendary names. They're all coming straight at me. It's a moment you're never going to forget. And, throughout the race, I mean, it was a difficult race because of an early accident in the race, but throughout the race, there was one car that sounded different than the other cars because most of the cars were Offenhausers. And I just was really attracted to it, knew nothing about it, but I chose, standing in the grandstand in turn 3, this car that I just thought was the coolest car ever. And that car was driven by Jimmy Clark. Mm-hmm. And so, you look at that, and Jimmy Clark was a global motorsport hero. Yeah. I could have picked anybody, but I chose it because of the sound of the engine and the Lotus that he was driving. And so all of those things aligned into not just a motorsport moment, but a very visual moment, a first-person experience that has kept me here for all these years.
You're sold.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, and like I said, later in life, after you're done wanting to be a fireman, an astronaut, all the things you do as a kid, certainly as a boy growing up and everything, wanting to be parts of that, I settled on being a veterinarian. But, so I was off to Germany and studying to be a veterinarian and working for veterinarians. And when you're in Europe, you can't deny there's racing all around you. And, my work life was get up in the morning and work on farms every day with the veterinarian. And on Friday night, would be able to come back, and the train station was a few minutes from my house, and I could go and get on a train and wake up Saturday morning at Spa or in any racetrack in Europe, basically, and go to the races. So that was that moment of getting there, being in part of European culture racing, which was on a whole nother level. And Paul has great stories too of sneaking into the pits and all the things you could do in those days. But I was able to have access to, and by just nature of sneaking around, getting into every place. And, I finally, while in Europe, with everything focused on being a veterinarian, I had to write my parents a letter. And that letter was saying, I just really think I've made a decision in life. I want to be a photographer. And that was, behind the scenes, wanting to be a photographer so I could go to the races. Right. So that was it.
And meanwhile, Paul, you were forging media passes and getting into races here.
Yeah,
in California.
That came later, but I think the eerie coincidence is that my first race was watching that same race, the 1964 Indy 500 at age 9, I think. Watching it on closed circuit television in the theater in El Monte there was a fatal accident.
Yeah.
Two drivers
Eddie
suffered.
Sachs and Dave McDonald.
And there were many people that were family and acquaintances of Dave McDonald, who was a young, very talented road racer. And 2 minutes into my first race, they stop it, and it's horrible. And we go outside this theater, and there are people weeping, and it was quite profound. But the rest of it, go back and watch it, I was hooked. And it is eerie to think about the fact that in that same moment, both of us clicked into the world we've lived it literally in real time. And so my father was in aerospace. He was training specialist at the time working for North American Rockwell on the Apollo program. He trained people to assemble and then disassemble and then reassemble the command module, and ultimately worked in the training for the command module simulator for people flying to the moon. So, but he loved racing.
Yeah. And when did you sneak into your first race? In high school, right?
I was in high school. March 28th, 1971 is the beginning of my career. I was working in a sporting goods store part-time. I'd been out to practice for a race called the Quester Grand Prix. And you were probably there.
I have the program.
Yes. So this race was at this beautiful new facility called Ontario Motor Speedway that was a modern replica of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but with a full FIA legal road course on the interior before Indy ever had the idea of having that, and also a drag strip. So my buddies and I went out there and watched the practice, and it was just intoxicating. I loved Formula One. I'd been a Jimmy Clark fan as well. Really, he was my hero. And he'd passed several years earlier in an accident, and I was now focused on Mario Andretti. I wanted to see him race. He'd won the South African Grand Prix in a Ferrari 2 weeks earlier. And so we went out and watched practice, and then Saturday morning, Spalding was part of the Quester group, had given the owner of the store, the sporting goods store, a credential. And he asked me, do you want to use this to go to the race? And where does it let you go? Just get you in the garage area? Sure. The one problem, though, is we needed more to get my friends in. So I stayed up all night long and painted 4 more using acrylic paints. And they were very simple to forge. And we took our Super 8 movie camera out and we filmed it. We filmed our incursion. And I just decided in that moment, I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to be inside this world. And here we are.
And so, Jeff, what did your folks say when you said, I'm quitting vet school and I'm going to be a photographer?
It was interesting. I mean, my parents were always very supportive. I mean, I was an only child, and we moved. I mean, I think I lived in 10 or 11 houses, places growing up. So they were very conscious of my nomadic life. So they were very focused on me, and I was working for a veterinarian over there, kind of waiting to get into vet school. I decided I needed to spend a year working there to learn the language and be ready to go to vet school. So that was the plan at that point, and I'd already been through some pre-veterinary schooling here in the States. But it was nice. I clearly remember the answer, and it was funny because in those days we didn't call each other. We wrote letters from back and forth, and we actually sent cassette tapes back and forth.
Okay.
And I would have a cassette tape of telling my life, and they'd tell it me back, and we'd have these little players, and that was kind of the way we communicated back in those days. And they came back to me and basically said, well, we don't know anything about photography or what to do, but you need to now research what the best schools are to go to, or how you learn about this, because it wasn't, being a veterinarian was a clear path.
Right.
And being an engineer, as my father was, it was a clear path. And my mom, a school teacher, that was all understood. But this was kind of like an art form, a creative service or whatever. So it was a little nebulous. So I researched, there seemed to be 3 photography schools: Rochester Institute, Brooks Institute in Santa Barbara, and then Art Center. And Art Center I liked because it seemed to be, most of the instructors were instructors working in photography, and it had a great reputation. And it also, funny enough, is the primary transportation school for transportation design and everything. So that also, even though that wasn't my pursuit, I when you'd look up Art Center, there'd always be these cool rendering of cars and things. And so I thought, well, that's pretty cool. So I decided on Art Center, and I got into Art Center with my portfolio of photographs that I had taken while in Europe. And my parents, to answer your question, they didn't say, "Oh yeah, come back and be a photographer." They said, "You're not getting out of going to school." And Art Center wasn't cheap, and my parents gave up a lot to get me there. And the equipment, every semester wasn't just going to school. It was like you had to buy a 2 1/4 format, a 4x5 format, camera equipment and lighting equipment, everything. But what it did is, when you left that school, you had every piece of equipment you needed, because you were forced to buy it along the way.
Right.
And you had a skill set that wasn't just teaching you photography, but had taught you the business of photography. Because the instructors were photographers working in the field, and all of them had to make it work as a business. Right. And that was probably the fine art side of photography. That's pretty easy. And I'm saying you still have to have an eye and still have to have an understanding of everything, but it's the business that kept you alive, and that was probably my secret to success too.
I heard that the majority of the instructors there are actual working photographers, and you can they sort of mentor you on not just the skill of shooting, but the business side, as you say, right?
Yeah, and to keep in mind, I'd never really been around a commercial photographer. Right. And this is what I'm teaching. And so literally like 3 weeks into Art Center, the class on Wednesday night was meeting at the photographer's studio. And so here's 35, 40 people in my class. We all show up at the studio. And I'll never forget it, because when I went inside the studio, it was like, I'd never been any place like it. And the greatest moment of the entire evening was the photographer had his car parked inside the studio. Wait, I could work somewhere and park my car inside the building I'm working. It was just like the coolest moment. Like, how things, you just want it to click. Like, okay, I can actually shoot cars. I can drive my car to work. I can park it inside. It was just like everything was like lining up. And there was one instructor I had named Rob Gage. And, there was a very LA, New York centric message there that, you need to be in the heart of it. You need to be in LA, you need to be in New York, you need to be in fashion, you need to be in product, you need to be in all these areas and categories that weren't really exactly what I was interested in. And I wasn't interested in living in LA. I wasn't interested in living in New York. And then I had this instructor named Rob Gage. He was working globally for Ford and Chevrolet and Mercedes and traveling all over. And he lived in Laguna Beach. And it was like, oh, there is the human being that's living the life I can see myself living. Right. And so, once I graduated from Art Center, I started, I built a studio in Orange County here. I worked for Road and Track magazine, who was based in Newport Beach. Right. I was a contributor to them. Paul Oxman Publishing, Paul Pfanner, all these little elements that were the key to the rest of my business life were right there. But it was Rob Gage who showed me that I could be working globally, living in Orange County, and focused on cars. And that was the first person that really showed me that.
Cool. Has Racer always been in Orange County?
Yes. And our lives are so intertwined and parallel without knowing this. I knew Rob Gage living in Laguna Beach, and I was being mentored by William Mata at Road and Track for my art direction. He'd take me to lunch. I'd have to buy him lunch at Jack's Shrimp in Newport Beach, and he'd critique the magazines. So when I first worked with Jeff, I was so excited about Jeff's work. I introduced you to Bill. And then both of you just went on to greatness, and I was still trying to go race Formula Fords instead.
How did you? Well, you both raced, or you still race. How did you balance your career and your racing?
I haven't figured that out yet, but I did spend most of last night getting all my driver's suit gear ready because I still believe I can be world champion. And it's a passion that drives you forward. Both of us take great joy in driving fast in a race car, or in your case, a rally car or a hill climb car. And we used our collective talent to get the things we needed. Like, I did track tests, you photographed them. I had relationships with the racing schools, so we got you through driver's school. We were part of these various racing school challenges. One year I did it, then you did it. And we just both knew we wanted to race. We were obsessed. And so all of this is a means to an end. I went down the journey. I wanted to be an art director, illustrator, maybe a magazine editor, but I really wanted to race is the primary reason I did all of this. And I know that was underneath what you were doing. Yeah. And I think it's helpful, honestly, because I totally relate to the people that are the subject matter. They effectively got to do in full bloom what I dreamt of doing, and I admire them and the commitment it takes. And I still think of the first photograph that I saw of yours.
Which one was it?
Really unusual. As context, I was going to work with another photographer who's a very talented guy named Ron Hussey, who I'd worked with, and Ron, a lot of really great work he'd done. He lived in Laguna. And Paul Oxman said, no, you've got to look at Jeff Zwart. So he was in here, and this is the owner of the business. And he hands me a photograph of a pig in a pigsty at Zandvoort in Holland. And on the horizon, there's a Formula One car going by in the background. And I remember just being gobsmacked at how brilliant it was because the juxtaposition of the two things were just...
It was just combining veterinary medicine and motorsport in one photo.
But I remember just going, yes, yes. I just loved the fact that it was unexpected. It was fresh.
Yeah. Do you think journalists and people in the automotive media have this ulterior motive to actually be the people that they're interviewing or the subject matter? I
think some of the most successful ones are that way because it's relatable on both sides. And I think that's a very important thing. I mean, even to this day, I credit my own racing to my longevity in filmmaking, and I create my longevity in filmmaking to my ability to race. They kind of feed each other. And I think in an ideal world, we want to be in kind of a perpetual motion kind of time, which is meaning it doesn't really take a lot to push yourself forward because the things around you naturally do. And that's a perception, but it's a positive energy to life. And for me, the fact that I have put a car on the edge of a mountain multiple times and experienced the dynamic of a car going into slip, the dynamic of a car driving it with consequence, all these kind of sidelights to racing, that when it comes time to put something onto film, I don't want it to be pure observation. I want it to have some element of participation. I want to share that point of view, that experience of pushing a car to the limit of in the places I have into my own filmmaking. And it's been interesting because whether it be a Jeep commercial or a Hyundai commercial or a Porsche commercial, there's some level of car dynamic, car capability, something like that you have to balance to where can I push this car that it's capable of doing whatever I want it to do, but at the same time highly visual. And blending those things together, the perspective that has come from racing and understanding that has really, kind of moved both careers forward in so many ways.
You've said very, very similar things about that. I mean, the name of the magazine is called Racer, right? So it's from the perspective of the racer.
Yeah, it's also just a mindset. And, one of the things that I was really inspired by Jeff early on, you just had this intuitive way of looking at things that was fresh to me. And I'd come self-taught. My interview didn't go well at Art Center, Jeff.
It's okay. You did all right.
I do just need you to know how I hold that against you. The reality is that this way of life, I often say getting to the future faster, learning faster than the competition, all that's true. But the most important thing about being a racer is accepting the risk. And life is a risk, and you're racing to the outcome you want with the possibility of not getting there. And most people are so afraid of the consequence of not doing what they really want to do that they don't try. And that was what was so inspiring about meeting Jeff, is you were down with it. You wanted to go for it from the moment I met you. And the idea that two young guys in their very early 20s would talk about creating a magazine and just do it with some certainty and the inevitability of us eventually doing it when we're rich and famous, which I'm still waiting for both. But that kind of mindset that, strap in, put your visor down, go for your life, I found a kindred spirit there, and I really appreciate that about Jeff. And I just also appreciated the rides in the various cars with Jeff, which were the snowmobile ride where I managed to trash a snowmobile.
I still go by that tree and think, there's the tree that has the mark in it from Paul.
At least Danny
it's not quite as tall as the rest of the trees.
At least my fellow Eldon Formula Ford driver, Danny Sullivan, was there to witness it. So but the point of all this is that there's just a way of looking at life when you're a racer. We used to say there are two types of people: racers and everyone else. And the brand, we're not for everyone else. Yeah. And that started with Jeff.
So Jeff, when did you finally get into a race car?
It was really, I think, through Sports Car Magazine. I got sent to multiple driver's schools, and the driver, I was there to photograph them, but the story kind of style was that we were kind of immersed in the school at the same time. And it was interesting because the Bondurant School and Jim Russell School and things like that were kind of the common schools in the day. I would show up, go photograph, and go through the school at the same time. And at the end of the school, which, I think is pretty common in general at these schools, they say, you're really good. You should try to do this. But it was more,
here.
Yeah, but it was a little more than that. They did say, you're just really good. And I actually even did the Bondurant Pro Search, which was, I think, a Trans Am drive or something like that. But I ended up in the finals for that too. But people kept kind of telling me that along the way. And so there was a Jim Russell Pro Formula Ford series, which ran in Laguna Seca, Sears Point, and Riverside. And I don't really know how it quite happened, but they offered it that I could run in that also. And as Paul mentioned earlier, there was every year a media challenge, which all the magazines were represented by. And Paul ran in it. I got to run in it.
We need to bring that back.
Yeah, it was really good.
We need to bring that back.
It was really good. But all of these things kind of added up that I did get some seat time. And I can say that I generally could qualify really well. My racecraft wasn't quite that part that kept me up front in things, but I loved it and realized it took some commitment, and and that came around later. All those things happen, but I'm busy, I'm working, I'm trying to build a business, I can't really pursue it. And so it kind of faded away. But the fun thing was because I spent so much time shooting high action things, I naturally needed a high action drivers to drive for me. And the two primary drivers, interestingly, were brothers, one coming from a road racing background, the other one coming from a rally background, and that was Rod Millen and Steve Millen. And so those two guys drove for most everything with me, and when I needed two drivers, it would be Rod and Steve. And Rod had fortunately had a full race shop, which he ran his U.S. Pro Rally Championship out of. And Steve obviously had a great Nissan program. And I just, one day, as we seemed to find ourselves doing a lot, driving to and from locations, we were on dirt roads out in Hungry Valley, which is up in the Tejon Pass on 5. I was in front and Steve was behind me, and we took off on this road to go from point A to point B, and nobody's out there. And I was pushing pretty hard, and I got, we're in rental cars or whatever we were in, but we are, getting pretty close on the limit. You check your mirrors, he's still there. I got to go a little faster, kind of thing. And at the end of that, and I clearly remember, because so often Rod's the one who really gets the credit, but Steve said to me, you really should be doing rallying. He goes, you're pretty good at this. You're really good. And so I thought, that's good, kind of cool. I earned my creds. But then Rod, in a natural way, said, we should build you a rally car. And so Rod had the Mazda connection at the time, and he built a rally car for me, and this would have been in 1988, like halfway through the season, and 89 I kind of ran a full season, and in 1990 I tied for the overall championship in the Pro Rally Championship.
323 or something?
Yeah, 323 GTX, and it was funny when you tie for the championship, it's who had more wins, and the other driver had one more win, so he officially won the national championship. But it was also a case, they had a weird point system where they didn't count every race. They gave you a chance to lose a race, and so not be at a race. And so I ended up winning the open class championship, but not the overall championship. But it was just a great moment. So that was kind of my first real racing car side of things. And at the same time, with my association with Porsche, I said that, it'd be really something. I love the fact of what I'd done in the Mazda, and it was a great car. But I thought, if only I could do something in a Porsche. And at the same time, in 1989, basically for the 90 season, Porsche introduced the first four-wheel drive 911. And so I thought, well, maybe I could do something with that. And Alwyn Springer believed in me, and Jürgen Barth back in Germany did. And we kind of all got together, and they got everything I needed. And it took multiple years to kind of get to that point. But in 93, I showed up in the U.S. Pro Rally Championship with a Carrera 4 full-on race rally version of it, and something that ultimately Porsche Motorsport had built, but through Andile at the time. And I still own that car today, and started racing in the U.S. Pro Rally Championship. Finished second in the championship in '94, but more important, in '94, they asked if I'd be interested in running Pikes Peak, and they loaned me, which is fun to think about now, the engine out of Hurley Haywood and Hans Stuck's, what was that, the Supercar Series cars, and so I went from a 300 horsepower, normally aspirated rally car to settling into this very familiar cockpit, suede steering wheel, all things, everything. And all of a sudden I had 550 horsepower to go run Pikes Peak. And I was fortunate to be able to win Pikes Peak in my class that year.
Was that wasn't your first time?
That was my second time. Actually, I did run in the Mazda back in 88 or 89. But it was my first kind of real effort to go do it. And that set the stage, and I'm 20 years later with 13 or 14 different Porsches and all that. But that was those moments. And then to kind of sweep it back even to road racing, and this is something that I was so busy, and I was traveling the world doing my craft of filmmaking, but I had the opportunity to drive an IMSA. I drove it to 24 Hours of Daytona with Jochen Rohr in the 90s, I believe. But the car, we had a problem with the car with Jochen when he was driving, and so I wasn't really able to complete that part of it. I just thought, I really do want to try road racing. And so I went, and I had another opportunity through Alwyn and through a friend of mine, Michael Schramm, who had actually won Daytona overall, and he gave me the chance to drive his car when he wasn't able to drive it. And my first race was the Miami Grand Prix, which was a 1.1 mile race, racetrack. And interestingly, at the same time, and this is where motorsport and
I was there for this.
This is where motorsport and real life kind of melded together, because I'd spent probably, I think, 2 years doing all the Audi commercials with the R8, with the the racing version, and working with Alan McNish and Dindo and all the cool, in my mind, just the coolest of people, and obviously working really close with Reinhold Jost, because he was running the team. And so all of a sudden I'm in the race with those guys. And I remember I said to Reinhold, I said, I'm going to be running, a GT car, going to be running with Racers Group and all this stuff. And I'm thinking he's going to share in my excitement. He goes, well, you stay out of our way. And I kind of hadn't even put together what that really meant. But to put it in perspective, so on a 1.1 mile course, when you're in a GT car in a street race, every 5 laps, we were being lapped by the prototypes. And they were coming through like a freight train. And you couldn't see anything. I'm coming from a rally background where the only thing that matters is out your front window. Nobody's ever going to be behind you. And it was just surreal, because it was a bit like rallying if I was out there by myself. I mean, the trees were replaced by, K-rails and everything else out there, and it was narrow and tight, and it started to rain a little bit before I got in a car. And and Kevin Buckler loves to even say that, like, he remembers when I came in, I said, this was sensory overload, because it was so busy. It was so crazy. And, the 550 Maranellos were running, all garden cars, and you could hear them coming before
you could hear them from space.
But all this stuff going in my first IMSA race. And so, I survived it, and we did well, and all that stuff. And I was pretty hooked. And so then, like a few weeks later, I've got my next race, which is Petit Le Mans. And I'm struggling there, and it's a longer race, and you kind of like, you get a confidence out of your first thing, and like you go into the next one, and it was just hard, and it was hot and everything else, and I ended up crashing in the event. And so I had this high and a low, back-to-back races, felt bad. And I also realized, there were other people in the car, obviously, and they didn't get their stints and things. I realized I affected so many people by, what happened out there. And I realized at that point, I go, I love motorsport, but I kind of have to choose my path of, let's say, least resistance, or what I could comfortably do. And rallying and Pikes Peak was more that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was more of a natural thing. I also, just love the feeling of a car moving underneath you. So, I kind of said, okay, road racing, I love and will always love, but if I'm going to do a sport, it's going to be the rallying and the hill climbs.
Right. I mean, IMSA is like an obstacle course, right? I mean, there's so many different classes out there, and you're just like, if you're in the GT class, it's just,
that first racetrack you raced on was narrow in a lot of places too. And it was really...
It had a jump even.
Yeah.
It had a place, like we went under yellow. I'd been out there for a while, and all of a sudden the yellow came out. Oh God, finally my back, it's like, and right after that, the Corvette, the yellow was, the Corvette went over the jump and just went right under the wall. But it was just, it really was like, for my first race, just amazing. But it went well. The results were good. So,
and you were there at that race?
Yeah, I was there for the media side, and I tried to stay out of your way. And I was at Petit Le Mans too, and you were despondent after the Petit Le Mans thing. Holy hell, you jumped in the deepest of deep ends. I just waded into the kiddie pool with Formula Ford, and you just went right to it, which I was pretty impressed with. Yeah. But, you chose rallying. I chose racing excuse making as my career.
What was the most intense experience you had at Pikes Peak, though?
There's all sorts of things.
Is it so easy for you now, though?
No, I mean, last year did prove that it wasn't so easy. But I had my first, did not finish, I guess, last year, and my history there. But people ask, like, what's my favorite Pikes Peak, or what is it? Because I think there's two parts of it. When you think about intensity is always race day. Yeah. I mean, the format of Pikes Peak, of running it in thirds, a mountain that weather changes, all the craziness that goes on there, and getting just one run, of putting it all together. Yes. But interestingly, the side that's fun for me is the process at Pikes Peak is very much like shooting a commercial, where you are constantly prepping and preparing, and everything comes down to a 30-second window. In the commercial world, you have to communicate clearly in that window. You have to deal with the weather around you. You have to deal with the crews. You have to deal with the sun setting. It's absolutely the moment. You can't come back tomorrow and say, oh, I didn't get everything. That's not the way it works. That's what Pikes Peak's about. You're up there practicing in thirds. You're taking in all this. The weather's changing. The mountain's changing. The grip levels are changing. The temperature's changing. All these things that you have to deal with basically on a shoot too. Yeah. But there's that definitive moment that you leave the line. And from one of the coolest things about Pikes Peak is that there's this archway that we leave the line and we go into a left-hand turn and we go underneath the archway. That archway is the moment the clock starts. But within that same archway is the top of Pikes Peak. You can see through there, like it was framed in a frame. And as you go through there, I'm pulling maybe even the third gear at that point. And you see there, and to think that you're going to the top there in under 10 minutes. To the top of the mountain. But, as you pull up on the line, the chief steward and the starter will come in and shake your hand or give you a fist bump or anything, and they'll give you a couple words, and you'll be like, oh, they're reporting ice at the 12 miles. They're reporting this at this. There may be some bighorn sheep, or there may be, all this. It's like, this is not the message you want when you, leave the line, but it's part of it. Yeah. And it's those things that you have to deal with. So I love the way that all that prep and everything comes down to one moment, in the same way it does in filmmaking. It comes down to that one moment. So that part's really great about it. So the tension's always there, to answer your question. But, there were cool years, like 2010, I knew that ultimately this mountain was going to be paved. Right. I knew we were going from basically a rally tire car, a rally specialty built rally tire running against gravel.
It was dirt when you first started.
Dirt, yes.
All dirt. So you've done all
I'm one of the few that have won in all configurations there. But I knew the writing was on the wall. And so I chose to run a cup car, a GT3 cup car, two-wheel drive car. And because in 2010, it was partly dirt, partly pavement. And I thought, this is my future, to run something road racing based from this point on. So I ran that, and it was really, really fun because it was a dynamic that was, I felt like I was a little bit ahead of the time on, and I was able to win with that car, and we overcame a lot of unknowns in it. And there was a lot of eyeballs on it of what's going to happen with this car. And suddenly I was running as fast as the traditional stock cars, and these monster horsepower cars and cars that have lived and breathed and run on the mountain for decades. Yeah. And I was right in the mix with them. So that was a good moment.
Does the fact that you were driving a rear-wheel drive rear engine car going uphill make some kind of a difference?
Yeah, I think, just in a dynamic way, obviously, as you say, we're going uphill. Yeah. We're altitude change of 5,000 feet, a mile altitude change, basically, over 12 miles. The constant acceleration out of 13 first gear hairpins, all the weight transfer is going to the rear. Having a Porsche that does that, I ran all-wheel drive Porsches for many years, but how much was the front wheels really doing? Was that really something that was the key to it? Obviously, when it's really slippery, it does give you some advantage, but in going to a pavement situation, it's just naturally a really good car.
Right.
And the dynamic too of the mountain is kind of interesting, is that people say, oh well, it must have been so dangerous in the dirt days, but the automotive or the racing dynamic of the early dirt days is interesting to kind of examine. Is that we would rush a corner and we would brake, and then we would rotate the car, and the car would immediately go into slip. At that point of going into slip, it's released its energy.
Right.
It's everything's kind of then driven on the throttle, and everything's happening at that point, and we go on. But the point is that the energy of that moment is released when we shift into slip. Now we drive absolutely to the limit of adhesion. Yeah. And if you suddenly find yourself where you think you are, but you're not, and you go into slip, the energy release is huge. Yeah. It's a huge thing. And so that changes. And so, the paved world is actually, more complex and, has that dynamic to it from a pure danger standpoint that wasn't there before. But the funny thing is, in dirt days, there was no guardrails. There was no real reference. You were turning against the sky all the time. And now there is the reference of the guardrails and things. But, also it's a bit like having, for me, I was generally 12 and a half minutes, plus or minus 15 seconds in the dirt days. And now I'm under 10 minutes. It's kind of like watching the same movie and fast forward. Yeah, so it's pretty wild.
You've had a chance to coach too,
yes,
right? And I think that's a really cool program. Were you surprised with some of the guys you were coaching?
Yeah, I mean, Porsche Motorsports always been really great to me, and they developed a program for the GT4s, and so and its own class, and Yokohama was a supporter of it also, and I think it's 5 years I think I coached, but there was always the drivers that wanted to come run the class, and then there was a little bit of a celebrity or whatever nature of people coming into the class. And since Pikes Peak was kind of my mountain, at least from the Porsche side in so many ways, I was asked to coach the class, and so I've had, it's pretty hard to imagine, but I've, coached Travis Pastrana and Tanner Foust and J.R. Hildebrand and all these guys have, we've all just, that's what's great about motorsport. You can travel anywhere in the world. You'll know somebody. There's that camaraderie. The fun thing about Pikes Peak is, it's something I've done, but it's hard to go anywhere in the world where they don't know what Pikes Peak is. Even more so outside of the U.S.
It's huge in Japan too.
Yeah,
Di
huge
and
in
I
Japan
were talking about
with Tajima there and everybody that put that place on the map, and the Ari Vatanen and Michel Mouton and the association with big brands in Europe. So that kind of, in my minor way of racing, it's kind of kept me linked to the community in so many ways. But the coaching's been really fun, and I got to say it's benefited me greatly. And the fun part is that because of it being a GT4, a normally aspirated car, it's very much a momentum car there.
Right.
So knowing the course, your biggest enemy is overslowing.
Right.
So the only way to not overslow is knowing the course. So that's the part I teach to and coach to. And, coaching hands itself off from, I'm going to coach you on how to stay out of trouble. Yeah. And then at some point, when I feel like it's appropriate, I'm going to coach you how to go fast. And it sometimes happens right away, and sometimes it happens later. But I learn from the guys, and that momentum thing is so fun to kind of see play out and understand. And I love seeing the success of it. And, currently I've been working with Lonnie Unser. And, when you think about that family's name at Pikes Peak, and I've been on press events with Bobby and Al, it's like, and photograph those guys in my day. And that whole full circle moments is so fun. And Lonnie, I coached in GT4, that I coached her last year as she drove a big car, and it appears that I'll be part of that program of coaching again this year. It's just like, those are really fun moments. And like I said, it's benefited my own driving too.
We still have a chance, Paul.
I do. I've been asked to come and give the excuse making coaching for the people who aren't doing as well. But yeah, what's interesting is, having watched you go up, one year I did get to see you go up the mountain, and holy hell. I remember thinking to myself, I wouldn't do that. And the amount of focus and commitment is stunning. But it's like working with you. You do everything at such a high level, and you think through what you're doing. You're well organized, well planned, and once you decide to do it, you're 115% into doing it as well as it could possibly be done. And I think that's one of the reasons it's been so interesting to watch you embrace this, become very good at this very special thing, and what is the second oldest motorsport event in the long-running motorsport beyond, Indy 500 is the longest running. But to see this, all of this stuff that I knew about Jeff be transformed into this mountain, no pun intended, of accomplishment at Pikes Peak. It's really, it's inspiring.
Yeah. And it's been fun too, is that, like, early on, before I even raced there, I'd shot commercials there. And there's still points of the course that I visualized from the air that I saw, and I know how the corners are linked together. And I go back to a Hyundai commercial I shot with Rod Millen or something, those kind of moments. And then the other side of it is just that, Ken Block did Climbcana, and I was asked to direct with Brian Scotto, and to drop into that world, which I had nothing but respect for with Ken and everything that he had done, but to be part of filming that on Pikes Peak. So not only has it affected my racing things, but I've shot so many commercials and so many things there. It's been really a part of me.
What was that like, shooting with Ken?
Oh, Ken was a magic man. It's emotional to even talk about it now, but I just, and the underlying thing about Ken was that I didn't really realize how much he even affected my film world.
Okay.
Because there was such a organic, real world nature to the way they caught him in his gymkhanas doing what he did, that engaged you at a level that, in a different way. And as a filmmaker, I wanted to bring that to what I did also. And so there was always that kind of underlying story to what I was trying to do, that, in the back of my head was kind of like, I want to do things like those guys are doing. So for me to ultimately direct a project with him on a mountain like Pikes Peak, which I know so well and kind of consider home, it was really special. And the part that was really amazing to me is that, he'd be like, it was shot in multiple parts. We had weather issues, car issues. We had a lot of things that it kind of took place over quite a bit of time filming it. But Ken, so busy racing globally, running all these things, doing all this stuff. He'd literally come back from Europe driving some Fiesta, hot hatchback rallycross car, and then literally drop into the 1,400 horsepower Unicorn Mustang.
Yeah.
And when you'd call action, there was no warm-up. There was no drive-through of, I'll ease into it. Look at the ease into it was never part of the dialogue.
It was all out.
It was all out. Yeah. And being in a place that was so full of nature, like, Pikes Peak, and hear that thing fire up and echoing all over the canyons, and then have it appear in front of your camera, unlike anything I've ever filmed, of four wheels smoking and sideways and all that sort of thing. And then to just, go past camera and turn around, come back and lean into the window and see this calmest, nicest guy. And how'd it look? It looked good. It's like, like that complete contrast to what you just witnessed. And, just a genuine guy and family guy and dog guy, just he ticked all the boxes for me, but yet he could drive, and it took no warm up. It was just made you smile.
Yeah, you never see him warming up. It's always pedal to the metal for that guy.
No.
Yeah. So just going back to Porsche, you have luftgekuhlt as well. It's wildly successful these days, I heard. The popularity of Porsche, I mean, why do you think that brand has been so popular? Become so popular too?
I mean, there's that's a good question, but I have so many ways to relate to it, and it kind of engages me, and I can certainly talk about for my standpoint, but I also think there's, the engagement can transfer in multiple different ways, but it's kind of a humble. It came from a sawmill in the late 40s, and they were hand hammering bodies over wooden forms, and then there was this moment like we should, it's lightweight, it's aerodynamic, it's underpowered, but the engineering makes up for that, and let's go run a hill climb, and let's go, start racing, and then, maybe these cars that we're building for the road are not quite right for racing. Let's do a 550 Spider, and let's build this aluminum four-cam, aluminum-bodied four-cam engine car, and let's go run a race like Le Mans. And there's all these kind of steps that were very natural steps that weren't like motivated by marketing or anything else. But the simple concept of rear-engined, described with the sweep of your hand, the shape, and lightweight materials of aluminum and things from the very beginning, they all carry into today's car. We are, relatively speaking, they're still kind of underpowered, to the supercars of today, but yet they can compete head to head with those cars. And the ideals of still being able to describe it with a swoop of your hand and the lightweight materials, all those things play out in it. But I think also it's just, I am fortunate to drive multiple cars, from different eras of Porsche's history. And, you drive a 356, it makes people smile. Everybody can kind of relate to the first time they saw an early 911 or those things. And I think that motorsport, I mean, let's face it, we're here at Racer. This is about motorsport. And they've really shaped the landscape of grids through the years in multiple ways and had touch points in Formula One, in IndyCar, in GT, in prototype. That's a pretty cool company.
Yeah.
And they're, now that we can have a Porsche experience in a Cayenne, in a Macan, in a Panamera, in a Taycan, and we can also kind of almost define a Porsche experience which has some element of motorsport, low center of gravity, great braking, great acceleration, great handling in cars that are common cars. The relatability is great, but what's the best part is there's a history to stand on, a parallel history in both the road side and the motorsport side.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the distinctive difference between other car companies and Porsche.
What do you think, Paul?
Well, just endorse what Jeff said, but I mean, I look back at my first experience with a Porsche. My grandfather, Robert Pfanner, had a 356C European delivery.
Yeah.
So it was in his garage, and I drove at least 19 24-hours of Le Mans events sitting in the car, as a young, really a kid.
Yeah.
But the thing that's so interesting is that it felt like a car for a human being as a tool to go fast. It was very mechanical. Everything kind of clicked. It didn't feel sloppy. And there was a handmade, almost race car quality about it that made you think you should drive it fast when you sat in it. And then to go ride in one was profound because of the sound it made. And watching this progression, the journey that Jeff's been on with Porsche, literally the first impression was to ride the 914-6, which is a car I absolutely love, and I aspired to a 914-6 when I was young. But to have the genesis of the company literally be in a 914-6 driving for prep for a photo shoot, down to the narrative of knowing the various people from Waszek Polak, Joe Hoppen, these people that we had contact with. There was a spark or an energy about the brand that was very human, at the same time very different than any other automotive brand we've dealt with. And our company literally started with a Porsche-related project. That was the Interscope IndyCar project, Porsche IndyCar project.
Which I photographed.
Yeah, and we've been on a weekend when nobody was around. But we had Porsches in the parking lot that raced the 24 hours of Daytona or Sebring or being tested for Indy in the parking lot across from us while we were starting the company. So there's this kind of DNA about Porsche. It's a race car first, and then we got to go sell some. It feels that way. Right. And more importantly, it's been a human company that's creating things that have an element of joy in them. And that joy, go to Luft and walk through, it's fun in a childlike way to go there because you're in a giant toy store full of everything you'd ever want. And Rensport is the same thing for me. I go to the best events I've ever been to are the two types of events. And now air water, same thing. When I go to these events, these cars are not, they're the vehicles of your dreams, literally take you to what you want and where you want to go. But more importantly, it seems like every Porsche has a soul. They're not just they're not a car. They're an expression of someone's dream.
Yeah. It's a very interesting brand. Like a lot of car companies have sort of like these eras of like, oh, that era, like this area, or like, oh, when Ghosn was there, like the Z came out and the GTR came out, and after he left, like all the cars, they all like, even the American, companies, are like, oh, they had like these eras where like, but like I kind of find that hard to find with Porsche. I mean, they've kind of done it right all throughout their history. And
well, there's really only two eras. There's the air-cooled era, and there's water-cooled era. And 1999 is the the changeover, and the luftgekuhlt brand that Patrick Long, who's obviously one of the best racers that ever lived in the U.S., and he's he kind of created this, and he came to me with the with this word that was all hard to pronunciate, and everything. But it just captivated me at the word. Obviously I knew about the air-cooled world, but to think of calling it that word, of luftgekuhlt, of what it meant, and I just immediately could see a bigger picture to it. And Howie and Patrick kind of started this thing, and Howie Idelson comes from a go-karting background, and Pat comes from obviously the most impressive of the modern day road racing career, and I thought if I could join up in some way and help cultivate that brand, and I've kind of become the creative director for it. But the idea that we can celebrate year after year the air-cooled era of from what everything's come from, and simultaneously tell the motorsport story. And Patrick and I both kind of having our racer heads on at the same time of being very focused and we've had a race to deliver or an event to deliver or whatever and perform in. It's been a really great
you have air water now too.
Yeah, and air water just became an all-inclusive thing. I still, we still see the luftgekuhlt as kind of our curated. It's the gallery, and the air water is kind of inviting everything. But the cool thing is, water wouldn't be what it is, meaning the water-cooled era, without the air-cooled. And so being able to link that, there's almost always a generation of car that can tell the story of how we got there in the air-cooled world.
Yeah. And in automotive, it's, I see more and more of that storytelling, as you say, like how we got here is very, very important. And I think a lot of the brands don't you think a lot of the brands are kind of latching onto that and making sure they have a story? Yeah,
but it's so organic to Porsche. It makes your job easy. And, there's every time there's a new book, you just think you've seen everything, and then you learn more about it. There's a new book, the archive book, which is all the parts and pieces that are sitting in the archives out, and you just realize, this is all behind the scenes we never got to see. And in that storytelling, for me, even one of the things that I love about motorsport, and then also the brand of Porsche, it provides the full circle moments. So often we talked about the Indy 500 and, where we are today and where I was as a kid. But, I have somehow, and, I have to pinch myself, but I somehow was in a position where the Revs Institute and Miles Collier gave the blessing that I could drive some of their cars at some of the great racetracks. And I've had such a fun time learning and driving and on very historically significant cars from that collection. But there was this point at Road Atlanta where there were a couple 917s, a 906, an RSK, and I was offered a drive in the 917 PA. And, to drive any 917, which I've had the absolute joy and honor of driving a few different ones, but of that car that was so important and so unusual at the time to kind of drop into the ultimate kind of motorsport at the time of Can-Am. But the 917 PA, I drove it at Road Atlanta, and, it's easy to say, it was magical, and, pulling gears and coming over the crests there and feeling like the thing's just taking its own trajectory as you accelerate. It was magical, let alone the sound and everything else around you, and your head poking out of this bodywork that seemed to be endless around you, and this giant 12-cylinder motor behind your head. There's just all sorts of things to attach yourself to. But when I got out of it, I thought, there's something about this car that I remember. And so I went through, my parents were scrapbook people. They made a lot of scrapbooks and made me make scrapbooks. And I realized, I was at Riverside Raceway when that car ran. And my father has a photo of me in turn 6 taking a photo with my Instamatic and I believe in that particular photo it was Dan Gurney or Lothar Machenbacher or one of those drivers in the background. But my very next photo in my scrapbook is the 917 PA that I shot with my Instamatic. And you just think, like, how could this be? That I, as a kid, photographed this car at turn 6 with my dad, those father and son moments that you cherish in a, growing up relationship, to I'm with the Revs Institute driving this car
Crazy.
At Road Atlanta, and that's just one of them, and I am just consumed by that, moment and the reoccurrence of the moment later and the importance of it. And it's just really special.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, you were mentioning how like at Pikes Peak, for example, you want to, like, those 3 to 4 days that you have, and you're putting it into, 30 seconds is like a commercial. Yeah. Is your approach to creating different when it's a 30-second commercial or a long form, storytelling format?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think in film, it's very easy to be sloppy. Because that something's going to be on the screen. I mean, basically, when we're watching something on screen, there's 30 images going by every second. In television commercials, there's a lot of times where there's less than 30 frames in each cut. So you can fall into the trap of, it's only going to be up on the screen for, 0.7 of a second or whatever. But I came from a print background, stills, where that putting your eye on an eyepiece and cropping it down and designing it and figuring out where the negative space is and where the positive space is and where type can fall and all those kind of balance of things. I think that, I want to keep an eye on design and graphicness even when it's film. So I think that part, the process remains the same. And that's what I like. I've been fortunate. I've shot almost 1,000 commercials. My parameters of what I've shot is global. Where I go and in the world doesn't matter. And I love the nature of the deliverables the same. The process changes all the time, but you have to take all and apply to it. And like I said earlier, the definitive thing in my life is when the sun set. As a director, I can get a lot of stuff done, pull a lot of strings, but I can't bring the sun back up. Right. That's the end of the day. So the focus in that. But I love, I went to India and I shot the same kind of campaign I shot for Ford in India. Yeah. But when I showed up in India, I had 140 people. Not a single person working with a power tool, hand sawing, pulling sets up with ropes, painting overnight, all those things. But it's still the same deliverable, and I love that dropping into other people's lives and seeing their craft play out for you and all that. It's really, really great. Speaking of that, like Zach Brown at McLaren, he made a comment the other day, which I'm sure he's probably made before, but I thought it was really something to take away in a cool way. He said, the team doesn't work for me. I work for the team. I make sure that they have all the tools to win. Right. I mean, that's basically what he said. And, I love that kind of nature to kind of swap the emphasis on your power is that, it's really about, working for those guys to make sure they have with it. And I love that approach. And I thought, that's kind of a creative approach. Do you
relate to that
approach? I do. Because I love the fact, and that was a big transition in my own career. Because as a still photographer, going from editorial where it was a bag on my shoulder and traveling the world, to commercial photographer, it's me and 2 or 3 people traveling the world, but it's still, that's it. And you're in that position as a photographer, you're responsible for the location scouting, the wardrobe, the, propping, the everything. And the biggest handoff was when I went and, joined up and kind of formed this company of Radical Media. It was, I was a director. I had a crew of 60, 80 people all the time. I needed to let loose of the micromanaging of everything, knowing that my grip is the best grip anywhere. My prop department's the best prop department. My art department, every department, that's their sole jobs. Yeah. And we've brought them together as being top of their jobs, all that. And so I love that it's still a creative process because they want to translate your vision, but you need to allow room for everyone else to do that. And I think that was a little bit of what I saw in Zach's comment is that, you're kind of changing the roles in this. So I love that.
You know who else says something like that is Paul Pfanner. You say that about your team all the time.
Yeah, it's true. Though it is true. And again, when you're a creative person, and you're working with other creative people on a project that's a collaboration, you realize you're less without them. It's just something, but one of the early lessons was Jeff. I went from one level to a vastly improved level just by working with you. The work product, what I was designing, you were actually designing by how you saw it through the lens when you were building the image or creating the image, and made my job easier and made me look better. And I think that if you work with creative people as we do, you realize there's just a little bit of getting all the kids in the neighborhood together to play a really fun game, but you want to do the best possible job of creating that moment. Yeah. And you want it to be shareable with the people at the other end that are consuming it. And only the best will do, ultimately. Yeah. And so if you serve that mission, and you're true to wanting to be great and do great things with great people, it works out. And, congratulations to Zach and McLaren. I was a McLaren fan from very early days. And that race that you were at, that I was at, that you saw the 917 PA, I'm going to bring it full circle here. I was there, and McLaren won every race that season, every single race. That was Bruce McLaren's last championship. He crashed in that race. Something failed on the car, which was unusual. And I watched him load the car. I snuck into the garage area and watched him help the team load the car. It was very badly damaged. And then that evening he went to the hospital to be with a corner worker who was badly injured from the impact when the car hit the wall. And I was struck by how young he was. And sadly, we lost him 7 or 8 months later testing that car. But what I remembered was, this is a guy that, his name is on the team. He's physically getting his hands dirty down there, helping with this, and was, he wasn't a superstar racing driver. He was trying to do the work of the crew to show he would help. Yeah. So that's what I love about this sport. You see a lot of that. I watch Roger Penske sweep the garage while the team is working.
Yeah. Yeah. In Japan, they say, when the president is cleaning the bathroom, you got a good company. It's like, it means, he cares, right? He cares about the little things.
No, that's a great one. I remember that. That's
So, Jeff, what is that process like? I'm really interested in like how you've made some like iconic commercials, right? And one of my favorite ones is which one is that? It's one with the classic Porsches all going through the desert, right? Yeah. That's a great one. Yeah. What was it like creating that commercial? I mean, how does that even happen? Like where does it happen? How does it happen? Like
that was that was very complex, and it was to launch the Panamera. So it was to launch a new. It's not just a new car; it's a new category of car.
Was that a Super Bowl commercial? It wasn't.
No, it wasn't a Super Bowl, okay. But it was the main obvious commercial that they did globally that year. But again, as I've said earlier, it's always important, especially with a brand like Porsche, to be able to link things with the past. Mm-hmm. And so we had almost 40 historically significant cars. Yeah. And, it was one of those things.
It's a nightmare.
Well, it was interesting because I had, you could choose to say, I'm going to get 40 cars from 40 people. Mm-hmm. But I knew a few people that if I, gave a call to them, I might be able to get multiple cars from a few people. So I think there was about 4 or 5 people that provided 40 cars. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty amazing. It was, we jokingly called it the first Zwart reunion, but the transporters all started showing up, and I had made a call to a few very significant people in the collector worlds, and maybe one comedian along the way, and so we had these 40 cars on the ground, and it was to create the family tree, and to tell that story that this family tree started somewhere, and it's not finishing, but it's moving on from that into a new style of car. So we created out here at El Toro Marine Base basically a desert scene, a dry lake bed scene, and we had to choreograph these cars. And we had as many as 20 cars at a time running, which was very complex just in communication and being able to talk to 20 drivers at once and all. Yeah. But what I did is I felt like I was an NFL coach and with all these big plays, because I would show, you at this point, at this beat, you're going to peel right. This other car is going to peel with you. This car is going to go that way. But the pressure part of this was, the car peeling right was the 917. The car peeling left was the RSK. Multi-million-dollar cars.
What
could go wrong? And so, we had all these cars doing all these different moves, and it had to be choreographed. You kind of had to reverse engineer it, saying, okay, the final scene is a giant tree, all these cars going all the directions. When you pull back in the helicopter, you're going to see all this taking place on it.
Tree.
Yeah. So, but to get there, here's the sequence of shots we had to do. So that's where the whole choreography came up, of these charts and everything to do it. But when you called action, my biggest fear in the entire shoot was that I was going to be remembered for running the $10 million car into the $3 million car. I remember when that happened, nobody will remember the Panamera, but it all went great. And I remember at one point on the second day, it's like I could see my grip department walking towards me, and I could tell by the look on the face it was going to be bad, and he comes up and he goes, we damaged a car. And I'm like, oh God, I'm just freaked out. Which car is it damaged? And he goes, it was yours. It was the greatest news.
Thank God.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, that is absolutely fine with me. But it was a lot of choreography, a lot of things. But the fun thing, as a compliment to me, for me at least, I felt years later. I was at the design department in Weissach, and I love dropping in on those guys. And so many friends that work there have worked there for so many years. They said, do you know that we use your commercial? And I'm going, what do you mean you use my commercial? They said, we actually drop new product into your commercial to see how it fits.
Oh, wow.
And I just thought, that's really cool that, beyond Panamera, new product, for a window of time, obviously, they would kind of put it into that, because I had actually shot something that took from the very first Gamoon cars all the way through to the most modern cars. And, we had the Spider RS. We had all these great cars out there.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's a historical, piece, right?
The Zwart reunion.
Yeah.
It's also simply awesome.
Yes.
No, I mean,
that helped a little voiceover.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, you've shot a lot of images for Porsche as well, and they're all iconic. But do they? So when the photographs that you used to do, with the clever copy.
Yeah.
So the agency comes to you with the copy, and then you have to visualize it, or does it pretty much? Is it? How much of it is done before you go out and actually shoot that piece?
Yeah, I mean, that was just a amazing time of advertising. And I would go out armed with these headlines.
Yeah.
And they were all, the things that were produced was 1/10 of the great headlines. We would just have all these great headlines, and we'd kind of go out, what stimulated you, and why are most rocket scientists German? It's like, okay, well, let's just jump a turbo off a ledge and have it going on there. And so we did that, and it eats Corvettes for lunch, and it smoking kills bugs fast, all those things. It was such a great era of advertising, and Fallon was one of the key advertising agencies in those days, and I, as a photographer at that time, to just go out armed with the greatest inspirational headlines, it made my job easy. And then to back it up, it was Porsche. There's cars at times, lesser so now, because cars have really gotten good kind of across the board in lots of brands. But, at the time, you had to kind of really work with some cars to make them be dynamic. They weren't naturally dynamic. And Porsche really was. And the fun part about it, when those particular ads that I mentioned came along, it was after me spending many years doing all of BMW's advertising. And BMW's tagline at the time was the ultimate driving machine. And so, when you took the ultimate driving machine concept and what you could do with it, that was a pretty cool moment. And I was shooting when the M cars came along, the M3, the M5, all the M6, So the distinctive difference in the way they were portrayed is they suddenly weren't sitting there elegantly. They were really pushing it, wheels lifting on the inside and doing all this stuff. So then BMW kind of went away to become more lifestyle oriented. And at the same time, one of the creative directors at Ammirati and Puris, who were doing BMW at the time, went to Fallon. And I kind of helped behind the scenes of where a car company should land advertising agency wise. And it happened that it ended up at Fallon. And I was asked by the same people I had worked with at BMW, who are now at Fallon, saying, do you want to do something where we get to do everything we couldn't do with BMW? And then I said, sure. And then next thing I knew, these headlines arrived, and it was like, okay, game on. We're going to have a good time here. And then, as you said earlier, it's kind of like when you're working for Porsche or I'm working on a motorsport project, I feel like I'm shooting for my peers. It's a different pressure, but it's a different motivation at the same time. If I love drivers like Tanner Foust and Reese Millen and these guys, Paul Dallenbach, that have worked with me for years. It's one of these things where I shoot to capture what they're doing. They know I'm capturing what they're doing, so they want to drive like this. So we are upping our game each other. We're doing it safely, but they know with confidence that they put the car on the absolute edge. I'm going to capture it. So we're challenging each other in the same way. And I said, well, let's try this and that. And it just keeps getting elevated. But the core of it is I feel like I'm shooting for my peers. I really, those are the people that matter. These are my people out there, motorsport people, racers, people like that.
Yeah. I mean, you're one of them, right? So it's so easy for you to understand that message and portray it, as an artist. I mean, that thing that you did with Tanner, the Forza thing was just spectacular too. It's like only you and Tanner were probably the only two people that could, get that done.
And I mean, for anybody, if you just look up Forza film speed, but that was all done in camera. And the technology of the time when I shot it, I could see it happen in the car. So I'm in the McLaren riding with Tanner, and we're at Barber going full on, flat out. And because the nature of it, which I don't want to go in all the technical things because it's a story in itself, but basically we had to pass by panels 30 panels per second.
Yeah.
And the bigger the panel, the faster we had to go. Right. So we had panels at 110 miles an hour. We had panels the size at 100, and we had panels the size at 90 or 80 miles an hour. I don't remember exactly, but we could physically witness. So
right, that happening.
Yeah.
Right?
So, and I have a monitor in my car, and it would go from all these panels flying by in my monitor to all of a sudden it starts to get really kind of quiet. All of a sudden I'm looking at an animated movie.
Right.
But locked off in there because Tanner is holding exactly 110 miles an hour. Now, the funny part is that the day that after all this testing and all this practice and everything, it comes down to the game day, it's the shoot day, and it's wet. So our exit speeds going on the straightaways are down 5 or 10 miles an hour. So, and I have to concentrate on the monitor. I say, okay, it's good. Okay, it's locked, hold. But I'm doing that looking at the monitor. I don't have my head up looking at the track.
Road.
And so, but it was taking us longer to get to the locked in position. We had 700 of these panels around the racetrack. And so we get into this locked off position. And it's one of those things where when it lock off, you'd just be staring at it and go, oh, this is just like magic. But at the same time, you realize you're hurtling along at 110 miles an hour into turn 4 or whatever. And I just remember that I finally go, okay, good, cut. And I just feel this braking, it's like my head's just buried, braking a lot of stuff. And I kind of look up like, what's going on? And then Tanner looks over me and goes, that was desperate. So, it's just, but you get to share of these moments like, I trust Tanner, I trust Reese, I trust Paul, these so many great drivers. Yeah, I'm just the camera in the car living this. And those moments of that particular film were just really magical because it was as much technical as it was artistic. Yeah. And the fact that everything was done in the camera, there was no special effects or anything. And, we won an award at Cannes. And, it was a project that I will say is probably one of my proudest projects ever.
Yeah, so. No, that was, how the way it was executed also was like so interesting to see. Yeah.
We really had fun. And it was, and you're out there in a McLaren, and you got camera. We turned the McLaren into this camera, and as a funny sidelight to the whole thing, it's in Wikipedia as the world's fastest zoetrope. It's like, how it's like all that kind of stuff. So cool.
Yeah. How do you think, so that was done pretty in an analog way, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How has technology, the progress of technology changed the way you create now?
It was interesting because I'd say for half my career, I shot with one camera, shot with an Arriflex 35 millimeter camera. There was no question. I would land in Tokyo, I'd have an Arriflex. I'd land in Munich, I'd have an Arriflex. That was the way it was. And then there was this point in my life where I shot with a different camera. When the digital world hit, I shot with a different camera every time. I was a Panasonic with a Sony with a Red with a and ultimately Arri. Again, I came back to Arri with a great digital camera. But funny enough, in that particular project, I think a lot of people remember the Lartigue photo from the early days where the car was all bent, crooked, and everything. That's what happened when you were capturing with a traditional shutter. And the funny part is, in this particular Forza thing, we had to shoot with a high-speed camera, which actually has a global shutter that spins in a different way than a normal opening and closing.
How many frames per second?
Well, we still shot at 30 frames per second, but we had to use a high-speed camera that by its nature of its mechanical nature, it would give me a non-distorted image. If I'd done it with a traditional shutter opening closing kind of thing, it would have been a different story. But technology is important, but I have a book out that's entirely shot on my iPhone.
I think it's the one I saw at the Experience Center.
Yes, yeah. So that's the classic. It doesn't matter what camera you have, it's where you point it. And that's still what I go by. And the nice part about my film side of things is I'm supported by a huge crew, and my camera department is there to make sure I have the greatest equipment. And honestly, when my eye goes on the eyepiece, I don't think about whether I'm shooting with a red or with a Arri or with a whatever the format is. I just still feel like my job is to translate what ultimately the client and the audience wants to have in some way, and cameras are evolving.
How has AI, the emergence of AI and these AI tools, affected you or the people around you?
It's certainly a very dramatic time for the industry, for actors, for voiceover, for imagery. There's kind of no limits and no rules, and it's evolving as fast as possible. But, we also kind of went through a moment where CG came along, or, if you go back before I was shooting, there were glass plates where they paint in physically things around, So there's always been an element of technological advancement in what we do. But I think that the potential of AI is something that we don't really fully understand where it'll take us and what will be the norm, because we're already it's funny, if you just take the video game world, I shot a lot of video game commercials because if I filmed, it was an enhanced version of the game.
Yeah.
So I would always do this behind the scene filming, and then there'd be a few frames of the actual game footage, which wasn't quite the same level of obviously what I'd shot when I shot a Need for Speed commercial or whatever I did, and I shot a lot of commercials for game, for IDOS and for Soviet Strike and all the wacky, games of the day. And now that's kind of gone in the reverse, where there's very little need. And, so there's a constant handoff in what we do. But it does, I will say, in a little bit of a selfish way, I'm very happy in the time that my career was the strongest. I was in a real life moment of filming where I didn't rely on, effects or CG or even retouching in my stills world. I shot things for real, and that allowed me to live things for real because I always saw the camera as a participant rather than an observer. And that whole ideal is something that may be, the last of that style of shooting.
Yeah. For young creatives that are coming up right now, I think it's a different story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're not just competing with the next guy; they're competing with software now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a pure, clear path in things for marketing and advertising. We were, you need to be on Cheers, or you need to be on Friends, or you need to be on the Super Bowl, or the whatever. There were clear formulas to marketing.
Yeah.
And now it goes from Instagram stories to whatever. It's all media, but in different forms. And when it's crowdsourced and it's, not outside of advertising agency, traditional, paths, it's just, it's the Wild West in a way.
Yeah.
But I think the exciting part is when I meet new creatives and new filmmakers is their skill set is so full. I didn't even have to load a camera in my day. My camera department did it. I had a whole crew that did it. And now, I discovered years ago Will Rogie. And I'd talk to him, and he'd be in Dubai shooting something in Dubai, and then I'd say, "Well, I'll talk to you when you get in LA," and we'll follow up on this conversation in LA. And he goes, "Yeah, I just got to LA. I edited the piece on the plane. I'm going to send it over to you to see what you think," or whatever. It's like, I can't edit. I can't load a camera. I can't do it. My thing was just about being a director and framing my shots. So I love that the modern creatives have such a wide band of skill sets, and they can kind of create in such a fluid way without the boundaries of the things that I traditionally went through.
Yeah. So Paul, racer Media and Marketing is the name of the company.
Yeah.
How are you looking at the future of media and marketing?
Oh, with just excitement and anticipation. And, and I want to just thank you, Taro, for helping me see the future. We've known each other now for more than 15 years now, I'm sure.
I take very little credit for that.
But seriously, I am always excited by what comes next. And the ability to tell stories in deeply emotional ways and impactful ways with all of the technology that's available now to enable us to distribute it. The various formats the brand could exist in, which is something we both dreamt of. This brand is a moving image brand, not just a still image print brand. We were early in the web space. Our early partners were ESPN, Speed Vision, and Speed. So now we can do all of these things, and we can do it through social distribution. We have a full social media team now. Through you, we have this growing creator network with some brilliant creators, some people I've admired and followed for some time that expand our voice and our relationship with audience and see the world through a more personal lens, which I think is welcome to me. So the Racer brand has always been about mindset, not about a thing. It's that, getting to the future faster, learning faster than the competition. And we now have more tools. And there's more coming.
Yep.
We're working on some really cool things that we'll hopefully announce soon. But what hasn't changed, it's a little bit like Jeff standing there with his camera at, I think it was the entrance to Turn 7 where you were shooting those photographs with your jacket with all the patches all over it in 1969.
Lots of sponsors.
Yeah. But every moment of every day we exist, we're creating the future. Sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive. How you think matters massively. If you believe you can, you have a far better chance of actually creating the life and the future you want. And what I've been so fortunate about since the moment I met Jeff, meeting Jeff was transformative. It was the first lesson in visualizing how you wanted to have it turn out and then doing the work and being really relentlessly committed to being excellent at what you do. And Racer would never have happened without our friendship. And we never would have even had the initial spark of conversation where you challenged me to do more and do better. And we went through the ups and downs of this, the various things we've worked on. For God's sake, I think the second commercial you worked on the first commercial with me for Racer. The second commercial I ever had involvement in was a freaking Super Bowl commercial. That was brilliant. And I just think that if you're a young creative coming up, I have a daughter who's a young creative, and what she can do when she was in high school, for God's sake, she taught me how to edit video when she was, I think, in middle school. What a young person can do now is translate what's in them into something really wonderful, excellent, meaningful that can reach audience. And that's what you see with creators for the most part.
Yeah.
They're able to express themselves in ways that give me hope that our Racer brand has no limits.
Yeah. And the distribution these days is like there's no limits unless the algorithm is against you.
True. But at the same time,
which is a whole other conversation.
whole other conversation.
Yeah, it is. But what was interesting, getting to know you initially, Taro, and I'm turning the table slightly here, but I have to ask you a question. When you went the direction you were going in creating GT Channel and working with people creating content where you had the ability to create beautiful content, you had experience. What made you realize so early on that the power, the actual audience is the medium, the audience could be creator, collaborators, that you could expand the base? What made you realize that, and when did you realize it?
Well, I realized, originally we were creating DVDs. Right. And there's a limit to what you can do with DVDs. And YouTube came out and basically wiped out our business in a matter of months. And we pivoted quickly to uploading the DVD content onto YouTube, and we were able to build an audience. But but still, we were limited by the content that you could create. So you can create one piece of content and it would go up on YouTube and we'd get hundreds and thousands of views. But when we looked at our audience, they had YouTube channels too. They were creating content as well. And it's sort of like, Jeff, like you make each other better, right? With working with Tanner and working with Reese. And that's sort of how I felt, oh, this guy, he's doing pretty cool stuff, out in the mountains of Japan and filming himself, and he's building a pretty cool car. We should probably work together, right? Because the audience is probably the same, or at least overlapping.
Yeah.
So that's why we decided, when we created GT Channel, it was Car Video Network from the beginning. Right. It was not just about us. It was about building a network of video creators and car videos that everybody could relate to, and sort of building scale as a business. That way we can go to the Toyotas and the Porsches of the world and say, we're not just a GT channel with 100,000 subscribers. We're a network with 1 million, 2 million, and that's how we just the power of scale and collaboration is sort of like where we focused on at the beginning, and we saw that.
I did, and it was transformative in how I looked at what was possible. And but it touches back to the origins of our conversation. Is I saw so much more was possible just from a day of collaboration with Jeff. The first day, the second day, there was another layer, and it was a lesson in the power of being open to other people's brilliance. You named all of these people you work with, and I hold them in really high regard for what they do. But when they come together in the cauldron, you're mixing it all together. They do things they normally don't do together. And same happened with you and GT Channel. And that's what I want for a racer. I want, all of us have our hearts in this and wanting this to be more. And that more is sharing our mission with others and involving them in ways where they help create our future with us.
Yeah. Well, as creatives, you can definitely create better and more collaboratively than in isolation, right? So, well, I mean, I'm honored to be here, and thank you, Jeff, so much for coming today and being on the Creative Drive. Lastly, we ask all of our guests, what is your creative drive?
What is my creative drive? It's evolution. I think that I want to be challenged. That's kind of the story of Pikes Peak, because it's never the same weather, it's never the same road, it's never that, and I love that. They say life is an adventure, but creativity is an adventure, and creativity doesn't come out of fear; it comes out of comfort and being an extension of yourself. And I think that's important, that there are just things in life that you're not fearful for. And it allows you to see further, see clearer, share the vision, those kinds of things. And I think that's my motivation, is that it constantly evolves.
That's great. Paul, what's your creative drive?
Oh, I have to answer this.
Oh, yeah. Everyone has to.
Ultimately, to move people. First, move myself to feel something when I'm creating something. But ultimately, I want to see the emotional needle move out in the world by things we create. And, I often use the phrase, we're not in the entertainment business, we're in the inspiration business. That's what I love about racing, to go do what you do in racing in particular. The mortal risk is profound. 2 minutes into that first race, I found that out, So ultimately, I recently wrote something about that no fear commercial we did. And I learned in that moment that all we really have is now. Each of us has now. So it's up to us to use that now to make a difference, make the life we want, but more importantly, to connect with others. That's what I loved about being in the media space from being a teenager. And that's what that still drives me today, especially the added dimension of Creator Network, the added dimension of moving image and sound, is to know that I'm connecting with other human beings to help them care maybe as much as I do, and maybe learn from them about something they care about. But the medium is the audience now, but the media that's being created in vast quantities beyond anything I ever imagined does that at a volume of needle moving every day that I never would have dreamed of. And you don't need 800 people in a production company to go do something brilliant, although it helps.
It's not bad, I can tell you.
You can go do a book based on iPhone photography.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, what simple terms, what motivates me is what's next.
It's like evolution.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff Zwart, thank you so much for being on The Creative Drive. It's been an honor, and it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching and listening to The Creative Drive, where we offer listeners a candid look into the minds of automotive creators and their journeys. The Creative Drive is available on all podcast platforms, and we have more awesome guests lined up for you guys, so please subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. If you're interested in partnering with us, or if you have any feedback, please email us at podcast@racer.com or DM us in our Instagram. The Creative Drive is produced by Molly Binks from Racer Studio, directed by TJ Keon, creative director George Tamayo, and edited by Andrew Snyder. We've got New Nick, OG Nick, and Morgan on the socials. I'm your host, Taro Koki. Thanks for watching again, and we'll see you next time.